There's nothing like watching a great movie on the big screen with an audience the way it was meant to be seen. The energy in the room is infectious. At Cowtown Movie Classics, we partner with the finest institutions in North Texas to bring you the glamour and thrills of old Hollywood with the proper historical context. Each screening features an all-new discussion with a world-class film historian, artist, or special guest, hosted by me, Ryan Bijan. We believe it's important to recognize how the icons and images of yesteryear inspire the entertainment of today. Cowtown Movie Classics. We make the old new.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog, too.
Put 'em up, put 'em up.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ryan Bijan, host of Cowtown Movie Classics. Tonight, we're discussing one of the most ubiquitous and beloved motion pictures ever made. From 1939, it's the one, the only, The Wizard of Oz. From Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, starring the fabulous Judy Garland, Ray Bolger, Burt Lahr, Jack Haley, and of course, Margaret Hamilton is the iconic Wicked Witch of the West. Joining me tonight is eminent Oz and Judy Garland historian. He's an award-winning producer. He's the author of the book, Judy Garland, World's Greatest Entertainer. Among several books he's co-authored officially about the history and the legacy of The Wizard of Oz. I can't think of a better person to talk about tonight's film than Mr. JOHN FRICKE. How are you doing tonight, John?
Thank you. You read that exactly the way I wrote it. Thank you very much.
Oh,
No,
of course.
I have those credentials. You can't. It's like being at your funeral. When you listen to a recitative like that. But this movie has had me totally enraptured since I was 5 years old, and that's 69 years ago as of now. And it was never supposed to become a career, but I've been very lucky to be able to do work in a field that I genuinely love so much. And so the research, the writing, all of it has been a real privilege. That's the end of my sermon, but I'm grateful that you introduced me the way you did. And I am especially grateful to say that, yeah, I have had those opportunities to share Oz and Judy, and it's a privilege. It really is.
Oh, I can imagine. I mean, of course, now you have a deep love. I mean, you are a great devotee of the great Judy Garland. And I imagine that this love stemmed from your love of The Wizard of Oz, discovering it as a child. But I think now, looking back, would you say that as far as your level of expertise, do you feel like you're more invested in the world of, like, say, The Wizard of Oz, L. Frank Baum, the book series, or Judy's career, or do you feel like they're kind of continually linked, right? You can't separate them.
Not only are they linked, it is absolutely a 50-50 split. The first time I saw The Wizard of Oz was the very first time it was on network television in November 1956. The anniversary is what? 2 days from now. It was November 3rd, as of when we're taping, I realized. But I was unprepared for it. I love music. I love musical movies. I had my own little record player already. My parents loved music, so they encouraged they had brought me the Disney records and uh, Peter and the Wolf, Sleeping Beauty ballet, that kind of stuff that was accessible to a child. But after that telecast of The Wizard of Oz, I talked of nothing else. And even though I was and am prone to enthusiasm, my next birthday, my sixth birthday, came up at the end of that November, and they bought me the original soundtrack album of The Wizard of Oz. The very first time there had been a recording commercially marketed of the songs from the film and some of the dialogue from the film. You could buy a record of Judy singing Over the Rainbow from 1939 on, but the other Oz records that were available were various choruses and good singers, but not famous singers. So to have that, and they also bought me a Wizard of Oz storybook, and they gave me the record that Judy Garland recorded in 1956. She was under contract to Capitol at that time and was doing an album a year. And she was then 30, she turned 34 in 1956. And this was 11 great standards from the Great American Popular Songbook with the Nelson Riddle Orchestra. So between the Oz soundtrack and the Garland album, they alternated on my record player, as we called them in those days. And I always joke that I'm the only first grader in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who was running around singing, "I'm going to love you like nobody's loved you, come rain or come shine," because that was one of the, I listened to the Garland album nonstop. And at that point, too, MGM began to lease its films, his early films up to 1948, to local television stations. And so my parents would watch the TV guide. I learned to do that very quickly. And if there was a Judy Garland movie on the morning movie or the afternoon movie, I watched it. If she was on the late show, they would put me to bed at 7:30, 8, whatever my bedtime was at 6, 7 years old. But they'd set an alarm clock in my room to get me up at 10:30 to see Judy on the Late Show. They loved her too. They're of her generation, and the fact that, I wanted to watch Meet Me in St. Louis or Easter Parade or Judy and Mickey putting on a show in the barn, my folks knew that no harm could possibly come to anybody from watching those movies. So I did, and, also when I was 7, I discovered that there was a series of Oz books, of 39 different books at that point that had been written since The Wizard in 1900. And so between Judy Garland albums and Oz books, I was set for Christmases, birthdays, Easter, whenever I was awarded something, as long as I kept track of what I had and what I didn't have, I was the happiest kid around. And this all happened simultaneously.
Okay. Now let me ask you, no, as I mentioned, the film, this is so ubiquitous in our popular culture, in our Western canon. It really is up there with any, I mean, it's one of those films like Star Wars or Casablanca, even if you've never seen The Wizard of Oz, like you have to be living on a desert island to at least not know the imagery, not know the characters, not even, know the song. People just know this film kind of inside and out. And I think it's safe to say that even though there have been other adaptations since then, right? Like The Return to Oz, Oz the Great and Powerful, the Wicked film, which of course is very successful right now. We have a sequel hitting this month in November. At the same time, our love of this story, it goes back to the 1939 film. I feel like in a way, this version has dominated the popular culture in a way that it's even overshadowed the book series by L. Frank Baum. I feel like people kind of look at that as almost not a spin-off of the book series, but they certainly live in the shadow of the 1939 film. Why is that?
Well, I think for one thing, you're maybe not maybe, but you're definitely too young to realize this the way I did back in the 1970s and ever since. We are not raising generations of readers anymore. That's part of it. Part of it is that the Oz books are not of their time, but they're for a younger audience now than they would have been back then. Back then, it would have been ages, 7 to 13, 14. Now you have to drop that because kids get so sophisticated so quickly these days that to expect them to believe in fantasy, you really have to start reading them aloud to them before probably they can read themselves. The Oz books still do very well, and you can get reprints of them. You can get beautiful facsimile reprints of the first editions, and they still sell, and people still read them. But we are in an era of people who like to watch, and listen as opposed to read, and one of the reasons the MGM film has succeeded, as quite nothing else has now up to the Wicked movie, part 1 and part 2 coming up, is that it is sheer entertainment, and geared toward, fantasy and geared toward music. Return to Oz didn't have music. Oz the Great and Powerful didn't have music. The movie of The Wiz had music, but the movie itself was so odd and so, I think, misconceived, is it never went anywhere. I saw the opening night of the original Broadway The Wiz in 1975, and, it was just pure entertainment, and that's what the MGM film is. It MGM I've always said MGM was the greatest entertainment business in the world in the 30s and 40s because they brought together everybody who could do what they did the best. And then MGM got out of the way and gave them the money to do it. And that's in front of the camera, behind the camera, all over the place. Beyond that, Frank Baum himself was an entertainer. He had been a playwright and as a songwriter and an actor and a half a dozen other jobs until he found his real pace as an author of children's books when he was 40, and Oz came out of that. But again, The Wizard of Oz was built out of stories that he made up as he went along, telling these tales to his four sons and the neighborhood kids in the parlor after dinner. In 1898, when Oz was coming to fruition in his mind, there weren't great recordings or easily accessible recordings. There was no radio. There were barely motion pictures. You had to make your own entertainment. Every home had a piano or a ukulele or a banjo, and he entertained those kids. And then MGM bought the Wizard of Oz property, and the script and the songs were written for somebody who they believed in so wholeheartedly. I mean, Judy Garland was 16, and they built this ultimately $3.1 million movie around her. She had been on stage already for 14 years. But they knew what her capacity and capabilities were, and this was their great chance to do something for her. So I think it's just everything kind of coalesced, and the fact that it is timeless is that most of it takes place in a fairyland, which can look like anything you want it to look. And the Kansas scenes don't look much different than a rural area would today. Uh, Plus all of those other entertainers too. I mean, you mentioned Haley and Lar and Maggie Hamilton, but Ray Bolger and Billy Burke and all of them grew up on the stage. They came to MGM as stage stars, Judy as a vaudeville performer. So they were used to going out there and kicking it across. And they got a great director in Victor Fleming, all of those amazing technical people. I think there's one thing to emphasize to any audience who watches The Wizard of Oz today, whether it's for the first time or the 50th time, that you have to remind them that there was no computer generated imaging in 1938, 39. Everything they're seeing on the screen had to be made by hand, in effect. The tornado, the backdrops, the poppy field, all of that had to be created. The skywriting witch, the melting witch, the burning witch. They can do amazing things. I loved Wicked, the movie. I loved Wicked, the show, but I loved Wicked, the movie, and I'm looking forward to part two. But again, they achieve all these things in the most technological way possible. MGM did it with manpower and imagination and wood and muslin cloth and all of that kind of stuff.
And the movie still looks spectacular. And you mentioned there's no CGI in this film. Of course, you're absolutely correct. Unless you're watching it at the Sphere, then I'm sure there's some digital changes in that format. But tonight we are going to show it the way it was originally meant to be seen. John, if there somehow is someone in the audience who has avoided this movie their entire life, what do they have to look forward to?
I think what they have to look forward to is entertainment. I don't want to, oh, great classical popular kids story that sold millions of books and the movie's made millions of dollars and has been seen by more movie than any other in history. You ladle that on, and anybody who hasn't seen it is going to wonder what the heck is all the screaming about. But I think you remind them that this was made 86, 87 years ago, and that again, it was all made by hand, that it was designed as an entertainment for all ages. And one of the ways it succeeds is that it does that. Kids get into it. The songs are accessible. The songs are clever. You want to listen to those lyrics. It isn't just, I mean, there's a lot of repetition, and we're off to see the wizard, the one, that follow the yellow brick road repeats, ding dong, the witch is dead repeats, but the lyrics in between, the lyric to Over the Rainbow, if I only had a brain, heart, and nerve, all of that is beautifully clever writing. The script is very funny in its own low-key kind of way. And the fact that so many of its lines resonate to this day, the first two that come to mind are some people without brains do an awful lot of talking and pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. I mean, these things can be have been applicable every time anybody's seen the movie for 86 years. But the scripting, the score, the costuming, the settings, the heart, the message underneath, the fact that Baum wrote the book about Dorothy seeking something and meeting three characters in Oz who are also seeking something. But if you watch along the way, before they ever get to the Emerald City, uh, Dorothy has great love in her heart already. The Scarecrow is the one who thinks their way out of their problems. The Tin Woodman is reacting emotionally to everything, and the Lion is the one who's putting him up, uh, even without uh, courage that he feels he needs. No, the message is that we all have inside us what we are looking for, and that it's our responsibility to believe in it and to put it forward. And these are all truths and human frailties and possibilities that have always existed. So you can relate to it on all kinds of level, but basically it's entertainment with some really good points strewn along the way. None of this is even as heavy-handed as I have made it here.
Right, and that's why we're still talking about the film and watching it all these decades later. Mr. John Fricke, thank you so much for your time. If you're in the audience, please stick around after the film so you can hear the rest of our conversation. Without further ado, from Hollywood's golden year, 1939, this is director Victor Fleming's The Wizard of Oz.
Enjoy.
So, as we alluded to, this book series was very popular in the early 20th century. There have been several adaptations as silent films, but by the time you get to the mid to late 1930s, why was the time right for MGM to, let's say, to use a modern phrase, to reboot this franchise? What got them interested at that point?
Well, the early silent Oz films, none of them had been successful. The earliest ones that Baum himself had a hand in came too soon. The pre-teens and the teens of the 20th century, there was no such thing as a family audience or films for kids. Movies were adult entertainment without the stigma that phrase later bore. But the kids could maybe like some of the comedies, but they weren't looking for fairy tale stories, and that's what the early Oz films were. The major one they did of The Wizard of Oz in 1925 was one of the most appalling motion pictures you've ever seen. They took the title, but that was about all that remained. They're the ones who created the concept of the farmhands in Kansas becoming the Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Lion. But the fact that they became the Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Lion in Oz was just like a minuscule part of an hour and 20-minute film. Dorothy was a lost princess. She had to win the heart of Prince Kind, Kynd, and overthrow Lady Vicious, Vishuss, and King Cruel, Krewl. Uh, One of the farmhands is a fine African American actor, but he worked under the actor's name, initial G, middle name Howe, Hawe, Black, G. Howe Black, and his
Mm,
character name in the movie is Snowball. I mean, it's interlarded with of its time idiocy, and really has nothing to do with Oz. So it
mhm,
tanked. But I think one reason it all came to fruition, well, I think three. Um, by 1938, movies had been talking for just over a decade, and they had been singing for just over a decade, and recording and the technology had become so much more uh, classic. And musical movies, Ruby Keeler, Dick Powell, earlier on, Al Jolson, Jeanette MacDonald, Nelson Eddy, as the 30s went on, Eleanor Powell, Bing Crosby. I mean, all of these movies had an audience. So music on the screen was important. Number two, in 1937, December, Walt Disney opened a little thing called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which was a huge success, as I think everybody knows. And it proved there was an audience not only for a musical film and a musical cartoon, but a musical fantasy, a fairy tale, as box office. And even before Snow White opened, songwriter Arthur Freed, who had been at MGM since the onset of the talkies, Arthur Freed, if you see the movie Singing in the Rain with Gene Kelly, all of those songs had lyrics written by Arthur Freed, music by Nacho Herb Brown. And Arthur had been at MGM writing those songs for earlier movies, but he wanted to become a film producer. And in autumn 1937, Judy was, forgive the cliche, taking the country by storm with her appearance in Broadway Melody of 1938. And she sang Dear Mr. Gable to the picture of Clark Gable. She had another big song and a dance. And even though Eleanor Powell and Robert Taylor were the stars, she was walking away with the reviews and the in-person audience response. So Arthur Freed went to the head of Metro, the chieftain, as they called him, Louis B. Mayer, and said, "Boss, can I have a chance at producing a picture?" And Mayer liked Arthur, and he knew Arthur's work had been a success in terms of songs. So he said, "Well, find a property, Arthur, but I can't give you McDonald and Eddie or Eleanor Powell. There are big musical properties." And he said, "No, I'm putting my money on the kid. Everybody loves her." And Arthur later said, "I made my bet on Judy, and she trusted me, and we helped each other." Because of the in the 11 years after Oz that Judy still worked at MGM, I think 13 or 14 of her films were produced by Arthur Freed, and they included the 4 musicals with Mickey Rooney, Meet Me in St. Louis, Easter Parade. I mean, the biggies, for me and my gal. So, Arthur, MGM, being ready to do something like that on the heels of Snow White, and the fact that they had Judy Garland. And as of that point, or when they started making Wizard of Oz, a year after Arthur broached the idea, Judy was the veteran of 6 feature-length films, was the veteran of 6 feature-length films, a number of short subjects prior to that, all those years on the stage. She was getting fan mail like nobody's business. She'd been a regular on Jack Oakey's radio show and on MGM's radio show every week. She was cutting records for Decca, including the Dear Mr. Gable bestseller record. Uh, it all kind of coalesced. And luckily, all of these people that came to work on The Wizard of Oz ultimately had the mindset of children. They could relate to children. They could relate to what children liked. And they went through 2 other directors before they got Victor Fleming, who was right. 3 other directors, pardon me, before Victor Fleming. They went through 15 writers, 3 of whom ended up doing the screenplay, but then part of it was rewritten on the set by John Mahan, who was a friend of Victor Fleming's, and he was there to kind of punch up the dialogue, or okay, we could get in a wisecrack here, or when they're waking up in the poppies, it was Bert Lahr's suggestion to the director, "Why don't you let me say, look at the snow and say, gee, unusual weather we're having, ain't it?" Again, these are the things that pro entertainers brought to that picture. And
Mhm.
and again, I am betraying my preferences or my bias, but it wouldn't work if you didn't have Judy Garland's sincerity holding the whole thing together. She is on screen for all but about 9 of the 101 minutes.
Mhm.
And it is her belief in the characters in the story, in Dorothy Gale, in what the plot is unfolding, that takes the audience along with her on this adventure. And surrounded with all these other people who made the most of every scene, but none of whom were out to steal a scene. Some of them had the material so they could do it, but then the material shifted to somebody else, and everybody got his or her chance.
And this is
Huh.
one of those rare films, which I think it's safe to say, in a way, it is an ensemble film, even though, of course, Dorothy is the lead. Everyone is so colorful, everyone is so memorable. It's hard to steal the scene because everyone is so fabulous. They do an equal job, I think, carrying the material.
I think another thing too that Wizard of Oz was only the 7th or 8th Technicolor feature-length film produced in Hollywood. They had started, I think, with Becky Sharp in 1935 or 36. David Selznick had done Tom Sawyer in color, and the original Star is Born in color. So there had been color features, but they were not at all common. And
Mhm.
one of the things that there are a lot of reaction videos on YouTube where people watch famous films and comment on them as they go along. And there are a number of those for Wizard of Oz with young people who have not seen the film. Sometimes they're European or Asian, but they some reason they have missed it along the way. And among the many things that blows them away is the color, because the color is so bright. And even though we've had color films ever since the 1970s, you can see a color film, but because of the storytelling and the approach, everything is so dark. I mean, it is gray and black and brown and olive green, and you don't have those bursts of uh, when the witch poisons the poppies, and it comes to that long shot of the blue sky with the white fleecy clouds and the red flowers, and then it pans over to the green forest, and then the foursome comes out in their colorful clothes, and then they look across the poppy field and see the Emerald City. Or when Dorothy opens the door to Munchkinland, that moment uh, brought the house down in theaters in 1939. People knew Wizard of Oz was in color, and they get in, and it starts in sepia. It was filmed in black and white and then washed in sepia tone to give it the brown and white and darker brown shades. But if they grumbled or wondered at that in 1939, they didn't for long because they got into the story very quickly. That's another plus, I think, in The Wizard of Oz, that the moment the film starts, you are pulled into a dramatic moment. You've got this wonderful little girl. Oh, look, there's Judy Garland. She's playing Dorothy with her dog. That's Toto. We all know Toto from the books, and she's worried about Toto. And everybody in any audience who's ever had a pet can understand that concern. And she runs home and she's a kid whom everybody is too busy to listen to. So that is, again, a relatable thing. And she gets to sing the number one movie song of history so far, per all the polls that have been taken. And then the villain comes in, Miss Gulch. And Miss Gulch threatens to destroy the dog. And Toto escapes. So there's that moment of relief. Dorothy runs away. She's far away from home, and Professor Marvel convinces her to go back home. Now, every kid in the world has wanted to, or threatened to, or even tried to run away from home at one point or another. I got as far as the street, but it was dark outside, and I went right back up. But there's that, all of these points to which you can relate. And then she's trying to get home, and she can't, and she's swept up. And there's that amazing effect of a 35-foot long wrap of chicken wire covered with white muslin that they have made look like a realistic tornado. In 1938, the only film footage that existed of a tornado was 25 scratchy black and white minutes. 25 seconds, pardon me, 25 seconds of a tornado in the Caribbean someplace, maybe Cuba, I forget. But that was all they had to go on, plus photographs. So to see that as a reality, and then finally crash, she gets up, she's safe, she's okay. What happens now? She opens that door, and there's the color again, and every color in the rainbow. When she is greeted in Munchkinland in the Oz book, it's just the Good Witch of the North and three Munchkins. That's it. They're the ones who advise her. And then she goes down the Yellow Brick Road and she comes to a Munchkin party where they're celebrating the death of the Wicked Witch of the East. Well, the writers conflated all that and thought when they open that door, they better be seeing something special. So they see the village, the Yellow Brick Road, the Red Brick Road alongside it, 124 little people plus 10 little girls to fill in who were dancers um, in costumes beyond belief. So color, big thing too.
Well, I think it's also worth mentioning too, to make the most of the Technicolor process. Again, these are so a part of our culture today, you wouldn't even think about it. But of course, in the books, Dorothy's slippers are silver, but the filmmakers had the brilliant idea, okay, well, let's turn them into ruby slippers so they look better in color.
Oh, absolutely, especially against the Yellow Brick Road. And then again, you can, I don't know that their minds went in this direction, but silver shoes, why do we have black and white shoes in a color movie? You know,
Right.
it just made sense. And I've been doing a lot of speaking lately about Oz. Well, only for the last 35 years, I've been doing a lot of speaking about Oz. But um, one of the points that has been fun to mention is that last autumn, just a year ago, one of the four surviving pairs of ruby slippers sold for $32.5 million, the highest price paid to date for a motion picture memorabilia piece. At the same time, the Wicked Witch's hat, and there were a couple of three of those, sold for I think it's 2.7 million. I'd have to look that one up. Um, and now, since August in Las Vegas, we have The Wizard of Oz at the Sphere, cut by 18 minutes, but blown up the size of four football fields and elaborated on with with computer generated effects that has sold something like 140 million tickets since August and grossed well over $130 million. It is just extraordinary uh,
Mhm.
what uh, what power that film has to this day.
Oh, certainly. And I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but you were fortunate enough to know Margaret Hamilton and a lot of the surviving cast and crew members throughout the decades. But as such like I said, as such a devotee of the great Judy Garland, would you mind sharing your anecdote? What was your interaction with Judy Garland like?
Well, I think I said I'll be 75 in this month now, and I'm very grateful to be around at 75, given the last 75 years. But one of the main reasons is that means I was old enough to see Judy in concert 3 times in the 1960s. Once when I was 14, and twice in 2 nights when I was 16. She played Chicago, which is not far from Milwaukee at all. And I had the kind of parents who saw that I got there because they knew how much it meant to me. And the second time I went down at 16, um, I coalesced with other Garland fans from the Midwest who were pen pals of mine through the Judy Garland fan club to which we all belong. And they were all in their 20s, and we all met in Chicago and saw the concert. And they were staying at the Ambassador East Hotel because that's where Judy always stayed. It was the chic celebrity spot in Chicago. And I was staying at the Y because that was in my budget. But I was free to go back to the hotel with them. And I went back specifically after the concert because we were going to see a TV interview that Judy had pre-taped on a late night talk show. However, after the talk show, like 1:30 in the morning, right off the lobby of the Ambassador East Hotel was the famous Pump Room Supper Club restaurant establishment. And again, it was one of the places to dine and see and be seen in Chicago. And Judy often went there after her shows because it was right in the building. It was very handy. So we went down 1:30 in the morning. The place wasn't too crowded at that point, but they had a four-piece combo for dancing. They played great 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s songs that were suitable for dancing. And the pianist and band leader was a big Garland fan, so he kept playing her songs over and over. It was wonderful. Anyway, we walked in, and sure enough, there she was right inside the door at booth one. Booth one was slightly elevated, it was spotlit, it was where they put the biggest star on any given night. They got to sit in booth one. So there was Judy with her ex husband, who was still managing her career, and her orchestra leader. And they were having late dinner after they all worked. And we, for some reason, the maitre d', I guess we looked presentable. I mean, my friends in their 20s did. And I was 16 and I was wearing a little Robert Hall suit and tie. And I looked like Opie of Mayberry for the red hair and much younger than 16 at that point. But they gave us a table right across from Judy's. I mean, if I'm sitting here and this we set up like this is my chair right here at my table, and my friends were sitting there, but Judy was no further away than if those bookcases weren't there and it was just the wall. That's as far away as she was, just the aisle. And we talked and we among ourselves and just to be in the same room with Judy Garland, something I couldn't even fathom. But when she was done eating, when we could see, I could kind of see the dishes being cleared off. If I was just trying to hold up my $5 glass of Coca-Cola in 1967 in the bump room to get a reflection. But anyway, once I knew they were done eating, I started to get up, and my friends, again, 7, 8 years my senior, 10 years, you're not going to go over and talk to her. And I said, well, I might not ever get another chance to talk to Judy Garland. And I had been figuratively in love with the woman for 11 years at that point. So I got up and the two gentlemen were talking to each other, and Judy was just putting down her cup of coffee. And I said, I went over and I said very gently, Judy. And she looked up, and I got this instant smile of welcome, as if she'd been waiting all her life to meet Howdy Doody from Milwaukee. And my first immediate fleeting thought, I looked down into her face and I couldn't believe, first of all, that there was somebody who looked like all those photographs of her I'd collected at home. There really was a person. Because seeing her on stage, even seeing her walk from the stage door to the limousine and from the limousine into the hotel, she conjured such size, such magic. Judy Garland was 4 feet 11 inches tall. You wonder why sometimes she had a weight problem. As she said, I eat a plate of French fries, and it shows. But she was great trim at this point. Anyway, but I was seeing Frances Ethel Gum having dinner after her performance. This was after, that's her real name. And so I was surprised to see that there was such a person. And then the fact that her eyes were always her most dominant facial feature. And indeed, they were not amplified in any way for the screen. They were huge and so deep brown, they were almost black. Anyway, this all went through my mind like that as she looked up at me and smiled. And I said, I don't want to bother you, but I just have to tell you tonight that I saw the show and I've never ever seen you perform better. Which coming from somebody who looked like he was 12 must have carried a lot of weight. But I wanted to convey that. And then without taking a breath, I went right on. And it was wonderful seeing Lorna and Joe in the act with you. She had her two youngest kids on the stage. Lorna was then, I can't do math, of 13, 14. Oh, I'm terrible. For roughly 14. Joe was like 12. Joe played the drums and Lorna sang in a little interlude in the middle of the act.
And
And
what
as I
year
was
was this again?
67.
67.
So
Okay.
Lorna was 14. She would have been 15 that November, and Joe was born in 55, so he was 12. And I said it was wonderful to see Lorna and Joe in the act. It was so much fun, and that was a great addition, or however I put it. And through all of this, she had just looked at me without even blinking, just looking at me and smiling and being very encouraging. Like what I was saying was important to her. And when I finally drew breath, she said, "Well, thank you very much. We do. I'm glad you liked the show, and we do have a good time." And she said, "Of course, the inference being that I was so on team with everything about her, I was already aware." She said, "Of course, you know that this is their last weekend in the tour. They have to go back to New York on Sunday to start school on Monday." This was September 1967. And they start school. I went, "Oh, okay, yeah." I've always said I wanted to make notes on my shirt cuff so I'd remember all this, but I just couldn't take my eyes off her. And I said, "Anyway, thank you. It was great." And she nodded her head, and I turned to go, and I remembered I had my back to her, and I remembered one more thing I wanted to say, and I whirled back around, and she did a mock little take, and she laughed, and I laughed, and I said, "Oh, and I'm coming to see you again tomorrow night." And that cracked her up. She threw her head back, and if you've ever heard Judy Garland laugh, on a TV talk show or in a movie, that laugh started from the soles of her feet. It was rich and it was roaring, and, it was beautiful, because it was so real. And she wasn't laughing at me at all. She was just enjoying my enthusiasm. And of course, that laugh was contagious. So we were both laughing. And when we finally stopped laughing, she looked up at me and she said, "Well, you've got a lot of courage to sit through two of them." And I said, "No, no, no, it's my pleasure." And then I said, "Anyway, thanks for everything." And that was the first moment the smile left her face. And she looked deep into my eyes and said with great simplicity and great sincerity, "Thank you." And at that moment, I would have done anything in the world she would have asked me to do. And I feel so privileged to have had that one-on-one with her for all of 60 seconds, whatever it was. And the other thing, too, is there are countless in the fanzines that came out, the Garland News, the Garland Gazette, the Rainbow Review. There were many Judy Garland magazines for the fans. Uh, she was like that with virtually everybody. If they came backstage, if they were waiting at the stage door, if they met her in a hotel, or if she was not being rushed, she was gracious to everybody. She'd see people, and this kind of thing was not uncommon. But what I love about it, one other thing I love about it is the fact that she could not know that she was looking at somebody who was going to be responsible for the preservation and presentation of so much of her legacy. 3 books on her, 2 on the Wizard of Oz movie, 2 Emmy Award-winning documentaries about Judy for PBS and the A&E channel, a Grammy nomination for one of the CD booklets I did, and a dozen other CDs that I produced, maybe more like 15. I've lost track. 8 of the Judy Garland movies you buy on DVD, I get to do the commentary track underneath them, in addition to
Oh,
Wizard of Oz is one of the 8. Um, I couldn't have known that, and she couldn't have known that. I had never had any intention of doing all this, but there are many things in every person's life that can be construed as miraculous on one level or another, major miraculous or minor miraculous, but just blessed. And again, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be around, but if it's another 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years, I'm going to be sharing this information with people who are interested in it, because especially where Judy is concerned, and even now where the Wizard of Oz is concerned, with the horrible stuff, the rumors that are created on the internet and spread. Oh, that picture was cursed, and this happened, and that happened, and yeah, and Judy this and Judy that, and no, people. One of the first authors, a book that came out about her just a month before she died, about her movie career, and she loved it. She said, "Have you seen this? This is one of the nicest things that anybody's ever done about me." That author pointed out on a radio show 2 nights after she died. Yes, she died at 47, and yes, she married more than once, and yes, she had a prescription medication abuse problem. But there are all kinds of people in the world who unfortunately die young and unfortunately cannot find happiness in marriage a first or second or third time, or who have addiction problems on one level or another. Judy Garland was one of those people, but she also made 34 feature films, including a half dozen classics, and the rest of which are vastly entertaining and hold up after decades have passed. 60 television shows, including 30 of her own, 80 singles, 12 record albums, over 250 national radio broadcasts. Between 1951 and 1969, 1,100 live concerts. The best-selling 2 record set of its time, Judy at Carnegie Hall, the first woman to win the Grammy for Album of the Year for that record set. And all of this, that's the extraordinary thing about her. Like the Wizard of Oz movie, Judy Garland is timeless. One of the people we interviewed for the A&E biography in 1996 is the great playwright, actor Charles Bush here in New York. He and I went to Northwestern together. And so we've been friends a long time, but he feels about Judy the way I do. And he said, I asked him a question on camera, and he said, the thing about Judy is she doesn't sing in any 30s style or 40s style or 60s style. She sings in Judy Garland style. And because she was one of a kind, that makes it uh, untouchable and incomparable. And if I sound like a fan, I make absolutely no apologies for loving Oz and loving Judy Garland the way I do. I feel very fortunate. And I think everybody who ever sees this or hears it or watches it will understand what I'm about to say. We don't choose these things. They choose us. Everybody watching is going to have something in their life, their occupation, their hobby, their pleasures that somehow they are glued to: sports, music, whatever, all of it. And I feel very, very fortunate that I was chosen to fall in love on November 3rd, 1956, with that movie and that girl. Um, couldn't have done better.
oh, certainly. I mean, you were certainly blessed. And you know what? You have me thinking, can you imagine, even though you watched that film as a young boy and it made such a tremendous impact, part of me wonders, say you met Judy Garland that evening and she was having a rough day, and let's say she was rude or dismissive to you, that might have changed the trajectory of your life.
No,
Oh,
no, because I think even at 16, and certainly if that had happened at 16 and I'd taken umbrage to it, which I had no right to do,
sure.
she wasn't on, she wasn't working, she was in her private mode and her private life, and she didn't have any reason to have to be that kind of pleasant, that kind of welcoming. Um, but she traditionally had been, which is in all those fanzines that I'd read up to then, gave me the courage to get up and just to say thank you. And again, I admit this egomaniacally to give me the chance to say that yes, I talked to Judy Garland. And I'm sure there were times when she was brusque with people because people could be horrible in their demands. Uh, not intentionally, but just very, rude and grabby and sign this and I've been waiting an hour. And it's like, no. I think I like to think from what I've seen that she was a very good judge of character too. She could gauge a person reasonably well. I think that's one reason she was so nice to the people who loved her and the
Hmm.
people with whom she worked. And I mean, she worked with everybody. And that was a great introduction to 20th century popular show business for me, because at the beginning of her career, she was working with Al Jolson and Sophie Tucker and Fanny Brice. And at the end of her career, she was working with Barbara Streisand and Peter Allen and Liza Minnelli and Sammy and Frank and Dean and Lena Horne and Barbara. And again, all these people, all the composers who wrote for her, all the greats. And they are I did one of the books I did on her is a big 6-pound coffee table book, Judy Garland, A Portrait in Art and Anecdote. And I don't say this to plug because all my books are out of print now, so this is not a sales pitch. But Judy Garland, A Portrait in Art and I get excited. I'm sorry. Judy Garland, A Portrait in Art and Anecdote, weighs 6 pounds. And my favorite review said, "This book is not so much a coffee table book as it is a coffee table. You could put feet on it." But there are quotes from all the people with whom she worked in that book, because again, I've been privileged to interview them. Also, the other thing that would have reaffirmed my belief in Judy Garland if I'd had a less than nice encounter. All of these people who knew her and knew her well and understood her problems, they won't hear a bad word about her. They'll say, yes, she made us wait sometimes, but she was not being temperamental. She was scared. They all knew that this was Judy would not come out of the dressing room at times because she was so worried about not being able to be Judy Garland. By the time she was 16, everybody wanted to work with her. This multiplied decade after decade after decade. And by the time she was in her 40s, a living legend, Miss Show Business, the world's greatest entertainer. When your talent is as natural as hers was, when it just came from way down deep inside and you didn't necessarily understand it, and you knew that people were waiting out there to put you on film or on videotape or hear you, and with her own insecurities about her looks and everything that you're not attractive, you're not Lana Turner, all the stuff that was implanted on her as a kid. Um, she just, it's I can't face him. I don't. How do I be Judy Garland? I don't know a button I can push to just go out there. But people understood that when it happened. And how many times did she just get up and go out there? When the walls were falling in, when the roof was falling in on the walls, when all of her money was stolen by or embezzled by managers and husbands, when she worked for 45 of her 47 years and had nothing to show for it financially. I mean, yet up until the last concerts she did were 2.5 months before she died. She
Hmm.
was in Stockholm and Malmo and Copenhagen. She never worked those towns before. They raved about her as if she were Judy Garland at 20 or 30 or 40. They didn't care that she was 46 and frail. They didn't care that her voice wasn't as pristine as it once had been. She came on stage and it was Judy Garland, by God. And there she was. And she could still put across a song. She was still a primo entertainer. And so I you can't tell, but I did stand up on my soapbox about 20 minutes ago. It's just that I think all these things need to be said because you don't get them from. I've been taken to task by some kind of elitist Garland scholars who say, well, John Fricke has never written a biography. He just writes about her work. And I said, well, that's because there have already been 20 biographies that didn't hardly touch on her work. If you're going to go into a page on 20 different alleged suicide attempts and pages on court cases and husband's mistreatment and all the rest, this is not why the woman was important
Mhm.
and why she is being talked about and treasured to this day. I mean, there are very few people who were major entertainers in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s who are lauded and found, discovered now the way Judy Garland was. Her base is extraordinary. And it was when she was alive, too. When I saw those concerts, my, people who have heard me speak before are going to be bored with this phrase, but I've always said that the age range at a Judy Garland concert was from fetal to fatal because you had parents who brought their kids at 9 or 10 to see Dorothy, hundreds of teenagers my age, because we had grown up with Oz, of course, as the little kids had, but also the other movies on the early show and the late show and her TV shows, her appearances. I mean, if you've never seen the clips of Judy Garland on the Judy Garland show singing Old Man River or As Long as He Needs Me or the Battle Hymn of the Republic in honor of President Kennedy, who had been shot 2 weeks before, and she was not allowed to mention President Kennedy by CBS. I mean, this woman is tearing at your heart. And then you look at her singing Great Day or Swanee or just all joy. She could do every human emotion. And not only could she sing about it and smile about it or look at you, it's all in her eyes, the happiness, the sadness, the resignation, the wonder, the what is it all about. Um, so if any of this does end up on screen for anybody, thank you for listening.
No, I mean, Judy was certainly, not only was she a force of nature, she was a remarkable woman, and I think she should be remembered in a positive light.
Oh, absolutely. Because again, there are all kinds of people who have all kinds of fame or don't have any fame, who have as many problems or more problems than she had. But no matter how many times they wrote her off, and remember, when MGM fired her, she was 28 years old and considered unemployable and washed up.
Mhm.
But within months, she was at the Palladium and then at the Palace on Broadway, and then A Star is Born, and then the highest rated TV special in history, and then the highest paid performer in Las Vegas history, and then back to the Palace and back to London, and then being told at 37 she could never work again because she had a horrific case of hepatitis, and no matter how much she tried to diet, she ballooned up to 183 pounds at 4 foot
Mhm.
11, and they didn't think she would make it. They drained 20 quarts of fluid from her body and told her, Miss Garland, when all of this was said and done, Miss Garland, we think you're going to recover, but you have to understand that you are a permanent semi-invalid at 37, and under no circumstances can you ever work again. Your body, your constitution won't take it. And Judy told this story. All the specialists crowding around her bed in the hospital, and she was kind of sitting up. And when they said, "You can never, ever work again," she fell back on her pillows and said, "Whoopee!" Because at 37, she'd already been working for, 32 years or 35 years. But again, she recovered. The strength of some kind of magical creature. And was back in a recording studio in 6 months, back at the Palladium in 8 months, doing the hardest show she'd ever done. All the earlier shows were musical review, basically, with dancers and singers and set changes and costume changes. When she came back in 1960, it was with a 3 hour one woman show. Act one, Judy, Act two, more Judy, 30 songs in front of a 30-piece orchestra with an intermission. And that's the show she played all over Europe, then brought back to the States, Hollywood Bowl. The Hollywood Bowl, where 18,000 people sat outdoors in the rain and nobody left for 2.5 hours. They made her repeat one of the songs from earlier in the evening before they would go home. Carnegie Hall, Judgment at Nuremberg, her next Academy Award nomination after Star is Born, and three more films, and the TV specials and the TV series, and then those last 5 years of ups and downs and ins and outs, and but still giving everything she had to give. And the people who saw her in the late 60s, as I did, if we knew her well, we knew, okay, she isn't singing the way she did 5 years ago, but it doesn't matter because she's entertaining somehow twice as well. And there were many nights when she sang beautifully still. It was the luck of the draw. But I talk like this because nobody else does.
Yes. I mean, you certainly speak from the heart. There's a lot of passion there. Now, there's certain films, let's say they come out, they make a lot of money, get positive reviews, and then over the decades, they kind of unfortunately fall into obscurity. There are other films that come out, they get awful reviews, they bomb at the box office, but due to home video, cable, now streaming, they sort of build a cult reputation and they become elevated over the years. So, what was the audience response like to The Wizard of Oz in 1939?
Well, in 1939, The Wizard of Oz cost $2.8 million to produce. And by the time they figured in print, film prints, and advertising, because they gave it a major campaign and a major distribution right away, the total cost for Wizard of Oz was $3.7 million. When it went into release, it was one of the top 10 grossing films of 1939. It was on the critic. They had a poll every year of 450 film critics. It was in their top 10 poll as well, but it lost money. It took in $3.1 million, which meant it lost about $750,000 in its first release. But there were three very good reasons for that. Uh, the theaters had been packed uh, to see Wizard of Oz. But again, two-thirds, half of the audience, two-thirds of the audience were kids who got in for 10 cents or 15 cents or 20 cents, as opposed to adults who got in for 25, 35, 50 cents. So even though Oz was breaking attendance records everywhere and it was making really good money, it wasn't making as good money if all the seats had been filled by grown-ups. Also, 1939, as you just said, the golden year of Hollywood. There were so many films being produced, and they were booked in advance into these theaters. Oz was held over for a second week and even a third week in many places, but it could not be held over as much as the managers wanted to hold it over because there were these other films that were booked to come in. And so that was part of the problem, the glut of product, the prices paid by kids, but most predominantly the fact that 2 weeks after The Wizard of Oz premiered in the United States, World War II broke out in Europe, and that eliminated the entire European market. And where MGM was planning on getting a lot of money because the idea of a color Technicolor film was new for Europe still too. Musical, they loved American musicals. Uh, Fantasy, all that kind of played into the Gemütlichkeit aura of so much of Europe. And Italy loved fairy tales. Great Britain saw it, but just briefly in 1940. Well, they saw a lot of movies that they were still able to get, but the rest of Europe, no, no, or uh, Asia or the Far East. So that cut into the money as well. So was it a box office sensation? Yes, because it was on the top 10 list of 1939 films at $3.1 million. Did it make money for MGM? Not for 10 years. And then they put it back into release in 1949 and it went into the black. And it was an object lesson for MGM and a lot of studios because it was, a good nobody realized that these movies were valuable. That, as you say, that they had endurance and power, and people would want to see them again. But there was a demand, and when Judy went back to the palace, they did a reissue of Meet Me in St. Louis, and eventually Easter Parade again. And Easter Parade and Meet Me in St. Louis were big hit films when they came out, no question. Top box office profits, great reviews. What is extraordinary is that by the late 1950s and into the early 60s, when old-fashioned musicals were kind of going out, we had that last burst in the 60s with West Side Story and Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music and Funny Girl and Oliver and Thoroughly Modern Millie. But then you had to be cabaret, you had to be dark, or you had to be Grease, you had to be irreverent, and and it went on from there. You didn't get the kind of musicals that had been popular. The crazy thing, though, is now all of those MGM films, even the minor ones, are looked on as classics because if they weren't great films, they still starred Judy Garland or Gene Kelly or Fred Astaire or all these other people who were going to do something magical, no matter what the rest of the picture was like.
Hmm.
And when Judy died, there was a opinion piece in the New York Times a week later by Vincent Canby, the critic. And he said, I looked through some cinema books this week and I found very few references to Judy Garland. She did not make pictures important simply by being in them. Well, would he have to eat his words now? You know, because MGM UA Home Video and then Turner Home Video and Warner Home Video, they would not have been putting out these movies for the last 30 years on VHS and Laserdisc and DVD and high def and all of this Blu-ray if there wasn't an audience for them and a
Hmm.
demand for them. And what has kept Turner Classic Movies going? The passion that people had in the 90s when TCM was launched and that they have developed in younger people ever since. Um, you go to YouTube and you look at Judy Garland film clips and TV clips, and so many of the it's funny because YouTube has been around for I guess 20 years or more, and early on the Garland clips would be half reverential and half, well, you know about her, she did this, she did that. Now it's down to about 5 to 7% of that kind of comment, and it's just I love her, I love her. uh she's my favorite. I'm 10 years old. You know,
Yeah.
it's wonderful. And she did that from the very beginning. I talked
Hmm.
about the youngsters in the audience at her concerts. There's a I don't this was in Hartford, Connecticut. Again, this is less than 2 years before she died. And there's a little girl in the audience. And I have a bad audio tape of the show. And by the end of the show, people are yelling out, Swanee, Rainbow, Chicago, you know, all of their requests. And there's a lull, and a lady yells out, Hey, Judy, this little girl wants to ask you something. And Judy says, Well, what does she want to ask? And you hear this tiny little voice say, Nothing. And everybody
Hmm.
laughs. And Judy says, No, darling, what is it? And you hear a murmur, and you know Judy couldn't hear it. And she says, Once more, a little loud. And the little girl says, Yellow Brick Road. That was the song she wanted to hear Judy Garland sing. Now, 28 years after the fact, she was not carrying an orchestration for Follow the Yellow Brick Road. But she said, the little girl says, Yellow Brick Road. And Judy says, Oh, follow the yellow brick road. Follow, and she sings the whole Follow the Yellow Brick Road song a cappella. And the audience is kind of chuckling lightly, loving this little moment. I get the sense that she was probably doing the skip around the stage too, because her voice is kind of doing follow the yellow brick, follow the and um and then there's a pause, and you get the sense she's again leaning over the edge of the stage in the voice in the direction of the little girl. And she says, yes, I was Dorothy. And there's a beat of silence, and then the place goes berserk. Because by God, yes, she was Dorothy, and she's Judy Garland, and she's Esther, and Hannah, and Jenny Bowman, and Irene Hoffman at the Nuremberg trials, and all these things. Um, and have there been other great entertainers? Yes, of course. Other great movie performers and movies? Of course. But when I did an autograph session for one of the books, and I had been answering questions like this and rhapsodizing, and the place was packed with Garland fans. So it was everything I said. It was like, oh yeah. Finally, one man in the back raised his hand and said, "Is there anybody else you like?" And everybody laughed. And I said, "Oh sure, all kinds of people." And I have to kind of sink down here for a second. Pardon me. I said, "Yes, and they're right here, right up here." And I said, but then there's Judy, and I went way up high.
Yeah.
And again, it's a personal thing. I understand that, but the great thing too is that I suffered as a teenager through all those years of people bad mouthing her and kids at school saying, "Well, I saw her last night on TV. She didn't sound very good," and then that kind of stuff and the headlines. But I remember she did a Perry Como show in 1966, and she'd been gaining weight. She had been reducing her intake of medication. She comes out and sings "What Now, My Love," which is a difficult song, and she hits every note. And the next day, teachers stopped me in the corridors at school. Friends stopped me in the corridor at school. That last note, what? So, um, what I've started to say though is that her reputation, no matter how much yellow journalism is done, people said when she died, well, that'll recede eventually, and it'll just be the work that's remembered. And lo, unfortunately, it hasn't. Everybody, the authors are all willing to make up stories or take a story and put the most horrible crepe all over it. But the nice thing is that the work is so much more available now, and it's there. And Martin Gottfried was a great Broadway critic, and this is the way I end one of the Garland books, and this is where I'll shut up. He reviewed the original Broadway production of Stephen Sondheim's Follies, Hal Prince, James Goldman, the most amazing Broadway show I have seen in my life. I went back a second time. Well, the one week I was in New York in 1971, the most brilliant, brilliant show. And it got mixed reviews. And Martin Gottfried, his reviews said something in effect like, I'm convinced Follies is monumental theater, not because I say so, because it's there for everybody to see. And that's how I ended the book. I said, I can convince that Judy Garland was indeed the world's greatest entertainer, not because I say so, but because it's there to see. And then not wanting to go out on my own opinion, I quoted from the head of the National Film Theatre, the British Film Institute, who did a retrospective of Judy's films 3 years after she died. And in the program notes, he added, his last comment was, this program is for all who feel Judy Garland was the supreme popular entertainer of all time. The revered National Film Theatre in London made a quiet claim about Garland in 1971, calling her the greatest star in the history of popular entertainment. The remark, they later noted, did not go unchallenged. Then they added a gentle dismissal of any further dissent. But once, not so long ago, people disputed that the world was round. And I
Mhm.
thought, that says it. I'll use that quote.
Well, you know what? You're reminding me of a quote from. Have you ever seen the 1943 version of Phantom of the Opera? It has Claude Rains, Nelson
Mm.
Eddy, Susanna Foster.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, there's a fabulous line in that movie I always come back to, and I feel like it's appropriate for this, but I'm paraphrasing. There's a line towards the end of the film where I believe it's Nelson Eddy who says, "His suffering and madness will be forgotten, but the music will live on."
Absolutely. And I'll close with my favorite Judy Garland review quote because it's funny. Um, Judy Garland could sing in front of Mount Rushmore, and you'd never even notice the heads.
Oh wow, that's a great quote. But so, John, as we're wrapping up, I know you're a very busy guy. What are you working on right now that you want the audience to know about?
Well, I do two blogs. I'm overdue for all of them. I took the summer off to do other stuff, projects that I can't discuss yet. But there's the All Things Oz Museum in Chittenango, New York. Just Google All Things Oz. That's Chittenango is where Frank Baum was born, and they have an Oz museum there. They do an Oz festival every June that attracts between 25 and 30,000 people in a weekend in a town of 5,000. Um, I write for their blog, for their website, and there's an Oz museum in Wamego, Kansas. I do one for them as well. So that's monthly work. I have a book that is just about finished and ready to go. I don't know. It's not my provenance to have it published. It's been underwritten by two other people, but it's done, and it is a pictorial history of the making of the movie White Christmas. Bing Crosby, Danny Kaye, Rosemary Clooney, Vera Ellen, Dean Jagger, Mary Wicks, which was a great joy for me to do. I was very flattered that they asked me to do that because I couldn't have done it for Psycho or the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari or what, because I don't have an affinity for those films. White Christmas and Irving Berlin is right up my psychic alley. So I'm hoping that'll be out next year. Um, I do festivals and lectures, and I do have a Patreon page now. If anybody looks for John Fricke at on Facebook, I find there's a page there that I have, and I comment on Oz and Judy stuff all the time. But also, there's an announcement once a month that I'm going to be doing a live talk. It's usually on the third or fourth Thursday of the month, where I've taken questions about Judy and Oz, and or show collectibles from around the apartment